Hello.
Hi, is this Stanley?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, let me do the official introduction, ladies and gentlemen. We are very excited to welcome our featured guest tonight. He is an actor from one of the most beloved television shows ever and is now a director and a producer behind the screen. We're very excited to welcome the one and only Stanley Livingston to the show. Welcome. You're on the air with Terry and Tiffany.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
We were just talking about how I became so wholesome and didn't do all the crazy things a lot of people do. I think it was basically because of you guys' show. Like seriously, I believe that was the very first show that was ever on the air to where it was a widowed father taking care of kids.
Well, there was bachelor father, however, he had one daughter. Ours was kind of, it really was ahead of its time in that it sort of predicted the future in a sense where there was a single parent raising a bunch of kids. And in this particular case, I guess that was the conceit of the show. It was an all-male household. So right. You had everybody from Fred MacMurray, who was the star of the show, to an older brother, which was Mike, played by Tim Considine, Robbie played by Don Grady, and myself, when I first started, I was 9 years old when the show began, and then we had the grandfather on the show was William Frawley, who played Bub. And he came to us directly from I Love Lucy.
Great show to sell. You know, I wanted to mention, too, I'm really sorry to have known that Don Grady just recently passed away. It was a little while ago, but he was one of my favorites. And did you guys, talk after the show? I mean, were you fairly close?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, with one of the actors I was very close, the actor that played Ernie on the show, right. That's my real brother.
Of course.
Real life, Barry Livingston. So, obviously, we still speak, but I was very close, to Don Grady. He was kind of like the older brother I never had when I was growing up. We were about 6 years apart, and yeah, he was a great guy. And, you know, sometimes when you're working with somebody the way we did, where you're working 8-10 hours a day, and I was probably around him more than I was my own family.
Right.
And to this day, I'm still friends with the guy who played the older brother, Mike, Tim Considine, in the old black and white episodes from 1960 through 64. Tim and I are still really good friends, and we see each other often, go to the Indy 500 together. So a lot of those relationships have lasted a long time. I was pretty close friends with Beverly Garland until she passed away about 3 or 4 years ago, and Fred MacMurray obviously went a while ago, and then William Denverstein came in when Bill Frawley passed away. I was friends with him off the set as well, and yeah, it's kind of hard. You know, it's like real life. You see all these characters that you grew up with that were kind of like your second family, and they're all kind of disappearing too.
Well, I got to give you credit. You must be one hell of a brother. We actually had your brother on the show. And, you know, you don't often hear this because guys are macho and this and that. He made it very clear to let the listeners know that he loves his brother.
Well, the feeling's mutual. I mean, you know, I would say besides being brothers, we were probably best friends growing up. We shared everything. All the way from, you know, bunk beds when before we were just getting involved in show business. I guess I got started a little bit before him, and Barry had a separate career as well, and I went on to do My Three Sons. In fact, I started my career on Ozzie and Harriet as a neighborhood kid, and the very last episode I did of Ozzie and Harriet, they needed a bunch of kids, and somehow they wanted my brother, so my real brother was on there playing, I think he was actually playing my brother on that show. I had to let the Nelsons know that I couldn't come back and do any more episodes, because I had been a neighborhood kid on that show from about, I guess it was around 1957, 58, 59, and early 60. And then I wasn't coming back, so they needed another neighborhood kid, and Barry was really cute, and, you know, I think they liked his work and all that, so he went on to do that, and eventually came over to My Three Sons as the character Ernie, who was a friend of Chip's, and the guy who played the older brother, Tim Considine, about the 5th year of the show, I guess he kind of grew tired of it. He was about 21 years old at the time and wanted to see what else life had to offer. And he did one episode, and then he went into the Twilight Zone. We never saw him again.
Well, it had to be a unique situation. I guess it was okay with you guys because here we have two brothers that really liked each other, but usually you want to get away from your brother, and you could do that on set, but now there's your brother on the set, and it's like there's no getting away from my brother. I mean, do you ever have any days when you guys...
we really didn't, because, like I said, we did an Ozzie and Harriet together. Barry and I were actually in a movie together before that. Most people don't know that he was in it. There was a movie that I did about I think it was 57 or 58, called Rally Around the Flag Boys, with Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, and Tuesday Wells. And they needed a younger brother, and because my brother went with me on the interview, they picked him to be the younger brother. Well, we started shooting the first day, and Barry made it till about noon before the director was screaming at him. We were supposed to be watching a TV set that was kind of off camera in the foreground, and Paul Newman comes in, and we're ignoring him, and he's mad that we're not giving him attention. But the director kept saying to Barry, "You're not looking at the TV set." And Barry's like, I am looking at it. And no, you're not. You're looking over there. Well, at noon, they took him to an ophthalmologist, and turned out he had a cross eye, and by 1 o'clock, Barry was fired, and there was another actor there. So, welcome to show business, right?
Wow.
So anyway, that was kind of his start in show business, and then, like I said, we did this episode of Ozzie and Harriet later, and then by the time my three sons rolled along, Barry was actually working a lot. He got through doing a Jerry Lewis movie, The Errand Boy. I don't know if you remember that movie.
Yes.
He had a really funny scene where Jerry Lewis these little kids come into the studio commissary, and there's a big, like, urn of jelly beans up on the, the 9th shelf up, so he has to get a big ladder, bring this 3-foot-high urn of jelly beans down, and he asks the little boy, "How many do you want?" And he says, "I'd like 10 cents worth of those jelly beans," and he gives it to him, and he puts the urn back, comes down the ladder, and asks the next kid, "What do you want?" And he says, "I'll have 10 cents worth of those jelly beans." So he goes up, brings it down, and before he goes up, the next time he turns to Barry and he says, "Do you want 10 cents worth of these jelly beans?" And Barry goes, "No, sir." So he puts it back up, he comes down, he turns to Barry, and he says, "What would you like, son?" And he goes, "I'd like 5 cents worth of those jelly beans."
Well, I think you wound up with the better role, because even though your brother's role was fun, you got to marry Ronnie Troop, the beautiful Ronnie Troop, and he got to hang out with Dodie a lot. So,
Yeah, I mean, we had some pretty groovy-looking women on that show. We had Beverly Garland was no slouch either. She was gorgeous. More. I don't even say Fred MacMurray's age, but more appropriate there. And then we had Tina Cole, who, I guess if you could say we had a hottie on the show, I guess she was it. She was the one who was married to Don Grady, and a part of Katie. And then, eventually, as the show rolled on, and the Douglases were being married off, I got married to Ronnie Troop. Had we lasted another year, I think they were going to marry the dog off.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Stanley, I mean, what was it like for you starting to work at such a young age? I mean, your first credited role, I believe, was in Please Don't Eat the Daisies with Doris Day and David Niven. I mean, did you have any idea of what you were walking into at that time, or was it just kind of like make-believe because you were a kid?
No, I mean, I always wanted to do it. I'm one of those kids. I grew up in Hollywood. I was born and raised in L.A. Unlike, everybody else is from somewhere else and comes to L.A. My parents moved to Los Angeles in 1947. I came along in 1950, and, I was just a normal kid going to a school in Hollywood. I went to Vine Street Elementary School, but early on, even in the first, second grade, they had little shows, where you would sing or you would dance or you'd play some kind of instrument. And, I just wanted to get up and be in front of people. And I remember being the MC for the Christmas show, and then I was part of the chorus and all that. So I really kind of had the bug. And I guess early on, I was trying to figure out how you got inside that TV set. I wanted to be. And it was just total serendipity. We lived in Hollywood. My mother sent me to a swim school in Hollywood that used to be on Hollywood Boulevard down by Western. And it was a big place and very popular with people in those days, because not a lot of people had home pools, so they would pay to go to this pool, and that's where I learned how to swim. But a lot of Hollywood-type people were taking their kids there to learn how to swim, and there was an agent there whose daughter she was older than me, but she was still learning how to swim. And, you know, I was cute, I was extroverted, and, you know, she took a liking to me and kept talking to my mother about representing me. And, you know, I think my mom was open to it, and they sent me out on some things. And it was before I actually had a part as an actor. I did some extra work, I guess you'd say, you know, where I was just one of many kids that didn't have any lines. And it really wasn't until I did the Ozzie and Harriet and I was hired there as an extra too. But Ozzie, I was talking to him in between. He came up and kept talking to me, and then just before we shot, he said, "Hey, you know what? I want you to say this line." And the storyline was he was selling Christmas trees in his backyard to make some extra money, and it kind of looked like this mini forest. And the joke was he had a prospective client there selling a Christmas tree, and then all of a sudden about 8 little kids with backpacks and sleeping bags come out of his forest. And my line was, "Sure was mighty good camping in there, Mr. Nelson." And anyway, I guess he liked what I said, and we shot it again, and he did a close-up and used the close-up, and next thing I knew, he went up to my mom and said, "I want to have him back." And, you know, you hear that a lot in Hollywood. You never see the people again, but he was true to his word. And, you know, about maybe a month later, I got another episode, and then they started writing episodes for me. There was one where they had a pony somehow came into possession of this pony, and I kind of was a neighborhood kid and fell in love with it, and my parents thought I ran away, but I'm sleeping in the Nelson's garage with this pony, taking care of it. It's a very cute show, and, you know, he was just great, a great guy to work with, and if you were a kid, you can have a more easygoing guy as opposed to some of the other people that I worked with later. I did a film later called How the West Was Won, which was the last Cinerama film made, and was a Western, and actually, Westerns are the reason that I wanted to be in show business. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up on Roy Rogers. And
oh, yeah, me too.
Those great Western shows and all I wanted to do was shoot a gun and, you know, ride a horse. I never got to do that until about 1962 when I got hired on How the West Was Won. But the director on that show was unlike anybody I'd ever worked with. Most of the directors were, you know, they were either very cool or they knew how to work with kids and elicit, you know, performances out of them. Where this director, who was famous director, a guy named Henry Hathaway, he's the guy that directed True Grit. He directed, I would say, probably half the John Wayne movies out there. They were really good friends. And he was a screamer, you know? It didn't matter if you were, you know, an 8-year-old little girl or a 13-year-old boy or a grown adult, man. He would just verbally assault you. And then, you know, when they'd cut take and lunchtime would come, he'd be like Santa Claus. So it was a real psychological head trip for somebody who would work pretty much with nice people. And not that this guy wasn't nice, but he was a tyrant on the set, and it just little bit different working perspective.
Right.
People don't believe that does go on. I've seen that firsthand, been on sets, and that happens. But the thing that I've got to ask is, because he's such a big icon to us, you've been so lucky working with great TV dads, Ozzie and Harriet, Ozzie Nelson, Fred MacMurray. How was David Niven? Because I don't think he, to me, would have a lot of sense of humor around kids.
You know what? He was better, I think, than most people thought he would be, because I actually had memories of him kind of in between scenes with the other two kids who were, I was one of a set of twins. The other actor was named Flip Mark, who worked a lot in those days. I still see him occasionally. And then another actor named Charlie Herbert, who was the older brother. But, you know, he'd come out and, you know, we were playing horseshoes, and he'd come out and shoot horseshoes with us and kind of play around. But, you know, it was kind of probably an odd spectacle for anybody who knew his on-screen persona, you know, kind of like James Bond bending down and playing with some kids, you know, playing jacks or something. It's incongruous, I guess you would say. Well,
you, Stanley, are proof positive to the fact, and maybe you can comment a little bit about this, especially considering your project, The Actor's Journey, but you are proof positive that just because you start out doing extra work doesn't mean you can't go mainstream as an actor, because nowadays so many agents tell new actors, don't do extra work because that's how directors will always see you. Do you agree with that?
I beg to differ. I mean, I say that in kind of a way that I can put it in perspective for you. I mean, I don't know if people listening know what The Actor's Journey is, but, you know, I've been doing this for 60 years, I hate to say it. So, I really have learned the business inside and out, because not only have I been an actor, but I've been a producer, an executive producer, a director, an editor, a cameraman. I know everybody's job. So I've seen it from every perspective. And, you just have sympathy for what goes on with actors. And I mean, even back then, I could see what the problem was. It's just that, it wasn't my place to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. I thought stuff like this was being taken care of in acting school or colleges, but it really wasn't. And what most people don't know, and I guess actors find out the hard way, is that they go to a college, a 2-4-year college, some of them prestigious universities, and learn how to become an actor. They learn the art and craft of acting, the artistic side of it and the creative side of it. What they're not taught is the business side of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that has been an issue for actors since time immemorial. It's like, how do I bring this artistic creative side to the business and let people in the business know that I'm here and I'm, ready to go? Because we see people coming out here that just spent $50,000-$60,000 on that education, and they don't have a clue where to start or what you do or how to interpret anything that's happening to them. Everybody knows get a reel, get a resume, try and get an agent, try and get a manager, try and get in the Screen Actors Guild. But some of those things are actually mistakes that you can make at the beginning of your career, particularly, joining the SAG-AFTRA too soon. It just paints you into a corner where you won't be able to work because you can't do non-union film. The union does not get you work. They take a lot of money from you for I think it's like $3,300,
yes.
and they hand you a plastic card.
Yep.
And they do I think, a horrendous job educating actors on the business side of acting. In fact, they really just started doing this, and it kind of coincided with me kind of I think they found out about my project and said, hey, this is really weird. We should be doing something here. And we've completed this program, and what it is, it's a 10-hour program for actors, whether they're brand new actors, aspiring actors, or even the ones that are been involved in the industry and feel like they're not getting anywhere. But it's a 10-hour-long program on the business side of being an actor. So it's all that mercurial information and processes that nobody's going to sit there and tell you about, because most people just don't know about it unless you've had a 5, 10, 20-year-long career. So that's the problem, is that the people that are teaching the acting can't even teach this part because they've never really been actors long enough to really understand how all these processes of getting work and interpreting what's going on so you can kind of get a career trajectory. So what I did is I brought 100 people together from our industry, not just actors, but directors, producers, executive producers, agents, managers. We even had the president of the Screen Actors Guild, the president of the GGA when we shot it, come in, and they actually teach this program on the business part of acting. And we literally left no stone unturned when it came to it. Like I said, most actors think of the, 5 or 6 things I just mentioned, but we have 60 topics, so that'll tell you that, probably about 55 of these things aren't even being taught, or, actors, nobody goes into it. So it's just sort of a blind spot for actors.
And we were telling our listeners, because there's a lot of them that wants to get into acting, that we totally recommend what you're doing as something that's definitely needed. I don't know if you've included this or not. Doing what we do here, the one thing that we've noticed about actors,
New actors,
talking to people like you, veterans, there's such a difference. You put on somebody that's just done 5 films or whatever. They don't know how to do interviews. They don't know how to talk to the press. They don't know how to come over with a good personality. Have you found this with some of the new actors? Do you cover anything like that?
Well, we do, in that, I think it's just problematic at the beginning of your career. How much can you know? I mean, you may be great when the camera's rolling or if you're up on stage, but it's this other part of handling yourself and handling your affairs in a business-like way and knowing what the boundaries are, what you can do, what you shouldn't do, and a lot of actors make a lot of mistakes because there's nobody there. We have no provision, no apprentice program, we have no provision to correct actors and say, ooh, you shouldn't do that, this is the way you need to do this. Right. There's nothing like that. So actors go out, sometimes make some pretty horrendous mistakes, and this isn't a big industry, and if a casting director doesn't like what you did, it's such a small industry for them, they tell all their friends, and you end up on a blacklist, never to be seen again maybe, or maybe not for years anyway. Just because you did something that you didn't even know you did that you shouldn't have done on an audition and maybe offended somebody or just came across very unprepared. But there's nobody to tell anybody this stuff. That's the reason we put all this information into this program so you can go through it. It's almost like a checklist in a way of things that you should know. And the only way you really would know this stuff in the past was if you'd spent 20, 30 years doing this and made all those mistakes and were aware of it. But the whole idea behind this project is, look, if we can get to aspiring actors or actors that are transitioning from colleges and universities and catch them right in the doorway as they're going in and say, hey, stop for a moment, you should watch this program because it will resolve so many issues for you and so many questions that you have that you'll be starting out doing this completely the right way because you're going to have all the information that really would only be available to the people that have done it 20, 30 years. And our idea was, imagine if these people had this at the beginning of their careers instead of going down into the trenches and spending, 3 to 5 years trying to learn the same stuff, and every actor kind of in his own little bubble trying to reinvent the wheel every time on this issue of learning the business processes.
And instead of
it's
a great tool.
It's very true. I want to let our listeners know, if you want to find out more information about it, you can go to theactorsjourney.com. But it is something that's very needed because I remember I used to do extra work and was trying to get into the business and everything, and all the extras focused on is, oh my gosh, I have to get my waivers so I can join SAG. I have to get my waivers. And I ended up getting Taft-Hartley because I got a line, and I went to, and I'm like, why am I going to spend all this money to join SAG? What am I going to get out of it at this point?
Yeah, get a plastic card.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's all the buildings you first hit town. There's all these so-called agents.
I was going to say, this goes back to you asking me about the extra thing in the beginning,
Right.
and I kind of took a circumlocucious way to get back to it. But, my feeling on that is one of the things we touch on. And it is a good thing. The thing that's good about it is if you're brand new and you haven't worked around cameras or on movie sets, it's a way to, really see how sets are conducted, how directors work, how actors work, and, you got a front row seat to see all this. But the idea is if you do it too much, then it does become problematic where you get known as an extra and people don't take you seriously as an actor. The other problem is a lot of extras, they get into that routine starting out and you have to do that and maybe be around the set, wanting to be actors, but what happens is they don't pay attention anymore. They don't watch it. They're over, eating at the crafts table or talking to the other extras instead of looking around for opportunities because sometimes they arise. And, if you're zeroed in, your radar's up, you find out that an actor didn't show up. I know plenty of actors that have gotten their start exactly that way, where somebody didn't show up and they pulled an extra, asked for anybody out there that had any acting experience, and we need you right now. And if you don't have that Taft-Hartley bump, then, at least you can get it. And that goes into another whole area that, we talk about in the actor's journey, that just because you get that Taft-Hartley still does not mean you should join the Screen Actors Guild. In fact, I'm going to give a piece of free advice. Don't do it. Not at the beginning of your career. It's the wrong point in time. I mean, at a certain place in time, that's where you want to be. But at the beginning of your career, when you don't have a reel with a lot of good stuff on it, there's no point in joining Screen Actors Guild because all it's going to do is keep you from doing non-union work, which is a lot more of that. And the people that hire the actors for that are a lot more open, to having whatever kind of talent they can get. But, what you trade off is you may not be getting paid, but you end up with great scenes of yourself. It could be the co-starring part or might even be the lead in a non-union movie or a lead in a student film. And that's what agents, that's what casting directors, that's what directors and producers want to see is your reel. They don't care if you're a member of the Screen Actors Guild or not. If you're really, really good and have that reel, they'll hire you anyway and Taft-Hartley you.
Yep.
And be careful of the storefront agents that want to sell you headshot packages.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes on a lot. Well, we go into that too. We have a whole segment called Gray Areas, Exploitation Gray Areas and Scams, because some of them are out in the open and, you may even know you're getting scammed, but it's unbelievable how many actors fall for it anyway because they get desperate and think, well, maybe this is the way to do it, and what's a couple $1,000, and they get fleeced and they find out it's no good. The other one that kind of bothers me, and that comes under the category of gray areas, are these casting director workshops. Till recently, till somebody kind of put their foot down, for about 10 years, these things were happening probably all over the country, but particularly here in LA, where actors are paying, to go meet a casting director. It could be $50, it could be $100. I've heard people paying, $200 if it's some big casting person. They thought, well, I'm getting in front of this person. They're going to see that I have talent. I'm going to do a scene. They're going to give me some insight or, maybe some tips on how to do it better or how to do it as an audition better. But the thing underneath it is they always think they're going to be hired for work. And it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not going to happen. And what wasn't being divulged, and I still think it isn't very well because it's always in the very fine print in the smallest font at the bottom of some obscure web page, is that these are learning experiences. They're not really set up to be any type of audition or job interview. And the reason they can't is they violate California Labor Code. And I think the people that put them on are not very upfront about that, especially with the new actors. The ones that have been around the block a couple times and have paid 2 or 3 times and then found out that that's what these are. But the new people, they'll go to maybe 4 or 5, 10 of these things before somebody says, hey, you can't be hired. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? Because the state of California says if you're going to go on a job interview, which is what an audition is, you can't pay to go do that. Mm-hmm. And if they hire you, you just paid to get hired, and somebody's going to get a $10,000 fine and go to jail for 6 months.
Right.
And it ain't going to be the casting director. So at the end of the night, all those pictures that you leave behind, they all go down into the trash can because these people don't dare take it with them, because if you could be linked to that person in that casting, to this casting director workshop, and you hired him, you just violated California Labor Code. That person now paid you for a job.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not. That's what I'm saying. There are so many little things like that. That's the whole reason we did this Actors Journey project. I mean, our business is just. It's a minefield of stuff like that doesn't get told to actors, and it takes a while usually for people to find out. If you stay in it, whatever, 5, 10 years, you're still susceptible to things that happen in the industry that, you think should be one way, and then eventually you find out that's not how it is at all. I mean, that's what the industry is. It's a bunch of smoke and mirrors.
People want to go with somebody like you, too, because, you've been there and you've done that, and you get some of these lectures and classes, people that was like, what have they done? Nothing? I don't see any credits at all. And
I know. Well, I've been trying to do as much as I can. I was trying to hope that I could reach out and get to the right people at colleges and universities, because they really don't teach that. And, part of it is I think they're frightened by maybe what we're doing, in the sense that people are paying a lot of money for an education, and it is an incomplete education, because this is a 2-component business. You do have to have the acting and craft, and you better be professional level. And to their credit, that's what the colleges, universities, and most of these private academies do very well. Where they're remiss is having a program, anything beyond just the cursory elements, cursory things that you need to know to get started. But you need to know way more than that. And eventually what you find out is if you're a professional actor, you're going to spend 95% of your time working on the business side of your career. And when you get a job, that's not really a job. That's the reward for what you did to get the job.
Well, you were
really how that breaks down. And until you look at it that perspective. Another thing we tell actors is like going on auditions, you're there to get the job, but really not. I mean, really, why are you there? Well, I'll tell you why you're there. You're there to meet the people in that room and impress.
That's right.
Exactly.
Impress the hell out of them. Because this is only about a single job, and you may or may not even be right for it, and you're never even going to know that. So your job is to go in there and show them what a great actor you are and what your talents are and all that, so that they remember you. Because next week, that producer's working on another show, that director moved on maybe to a different series, the casting person casting something else. And even if you were right, they'll look at you and go, that person is not right for this part, but boy, that person was really good, and I'm going to find something for them. And that's where it really begins to pay off for actors. So your goal of getting in the room is impressing those people. And if you get the job, that's the cherry on top of the sundae.
Right. Well, you're a great person to get advice from, because having worked with the legends, you worked with Jimmy Stewart and, of course, Fred MacMurray. And the thing I've got to ask, because, I often wondered if, like, these old guys ever gave you advice when you were young that now helps you in teaching what you teach. Like, what about William Demarest and William Frawley? There's always that question, is it which one do you like? Is like Ginger or Mary Ann? But with you, okay, it was one or the other. And did they give you advice? And I got to know what they were like on a set.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They were kind of, Bill Frawley and Bill Demers were cut from the same cloth, but in my perspective now, I mean, I have, I guess, I'm equally impressed by both of them, both of their careers. Although I have to say, Bill Demers probably had the more illustrious career.
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't know that because TV was becoming powerful, and I really knew Bill Frawley from I Love Lucy, and he was on every day, and I probably watched I Love Lucy for Bill Frawley, never so much for Lucy. I just thought he was so cool the way he was yelling at everybody and everything. But, you look at that and you go, wow, these two guys had pretty amazing feature film careers before they came there. Both of them were kind of quintessential second banana characters. They weren't never the lead guy, but they were the best friend of the lead guy, or they were the detective who was the antagonist of the film, who created all the conflict and was bugging the main actor. So what they did really well. The thing is, personally, on the set, when I was younger, I was much closer to Bill Frawley. Mm-hmm. When he came on the show, I knew who he was probably much better than I did William Demarest from the I Love Lucy show. And Bill was kind of a W.C. Fields character, and I don't think he really liked kids and dogs and all that. But for whatever reason, he took a shine to me, and we became really fast friends, and we hung out together on the set, and I'd go to lunch with him every day. He used to take me to Dodger baseball games, and he was just a great guy. Very profane, which was cool, and I learned every four-letter word I probably know from Bill Frawley.
That I can imagine. I heard a sad story about him. When he wound up getting I Love Lucy, he had a hell of a time getting anything because there was rumors going around that he was a bit of a problem, was drinking a little bit and this and that. But you didn't see any of that with My Three Sons, did you?
It wasn't a rumor. It was a fact. And even during My Three Sons, at lunchtime, because I ate lunch with him probably every day for 4 years. So we'd go to this restaurant around the corner from what is now Paramount called Nicodell's, which is, I think it went away about 10 years ago. But it was a real Hollywood watering hole and had nice food for lunch. It wasn't kind of like a fast food place or anything. It was actually a pretty nice restaurant. And Bill had a liquid lunch pretty much every day, as far as I remember. And, one or two drinks and go back to the set. And, but he seemed to handle it well and got to his work. I think the last year or so, and it was probably more his age that caught up with him more than the booze, or that coupled with the booze. He's failing memory and failing health, and basically he went in for the physical on I think it was the fifth year of the show, and they couldn't find his heartbeat or a pulse, so they decided this is too risky to go with, and they ended up replacing him with William Demarest, which brings me to the point of, at first I kind of didn't like Bill Demarest because he came in and he took my friend's job, or at least in the eyes of a 14-year-old kid. This is a guy that just took your buddy's job, and I didn't really warm up to him for a while. And but we eventually did. I grew up, and towards the later part of the show, I was interested in carving out a career, hopefully in show business.
There you go. You just said something that I never knew. You talk about how you learn things, these classes and stuff. I didn't know if you were on like a big hit show, they made you take a yearly physical.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
For film, feature films too. Somebody's putting up the insurance money, and they want to make sure especially if there's a completion bond, that you're actually going to be able to complete the film. So they want to make sure you're not going to die of a heart attack or cancer in the middle of the film. So you have to have a physical. There's a lot of other reasons you may have a physical. And there's a lot of reasons, this is another thing where actors ruin their own careers because they don't know that. They don't know that. That's what I'm saying. This becomes part of the business side of the business. If you get a big feature film, guess what? You're getting a physical before you go do it, because the completion bond company wants to know that the production will be completed. If there's any trace of, drugs in your body, they want to know what it is. They can go back to the producer and say, this guy's got a lot of cocaine, this guy's got this stuff in his system. If you want to use them, that's great. However, besides the insurance we're charging you, we're going to put a rider on it, and we want extra money. In other words, if you're hiring Charlie Sheen, you have an extra rider, because someday he's going to do a 4-gram rock and not show up at work, maybe, or Lindsay Lohan. As a producer, you're sitting there thinking, wow, do I really want Lindsay Lohan? I could get this other girl, and hey, she doesn't have any problems. I think I'll go with the other girl and save myself another whatever, $200,000 on that insurance policy.
Well, the producers of My Three Sons didn't really have to worry about a lot of controversy. I only heard one thing, and you can let us know if this is true or not if you want, because that's what we do here. And a lot of times you see stuff on the internet and it's all crap. And that was the real reason why Tim Considine left, was because he wanted to direct, and Fred wasn't too happy about that.
Well, actually, they were very, I think, open to Tim directing, and in fact, Tim did direct, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 episodes of My Three Sons. They actually gave him the opportunity to do that. Tim was very much interested in writing, and he and his brother, who actually was a writer, his brother wrote a lot. Do you remember a TV series called Combat with Vic Morrow?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, John Considine had written some of those episodes. In fact, a few of them he wrote with Tim. So this was a little bit later, but during the My Three Sons era, he was kind of a known writer, and the production company allowed Tim to direct a couple episodes. But what happened is Tim kind of overstepped his bounds. See, the problem was the way our show was shot. We worked in a multiplicity of shows every day. We could work in maybe 5 different scripts a day. So we needed a single director. We were one of the few shows that had a single director the whole season just to juggle all of this, and it was primarily to accommodate Fred MacMurray's shooting schedule. He'd come in for 3 months, we'd shoot everything with him, he'd go away for 3 months, we'd shoot all the stuff without him, and then he'd come back for 3 months at the end, and we'd pick up all the stuff that was left. So we were in a lot of different scripts a day. So for an actor or any director coming in that wasn't the regular director, we weren't shooting any particular show out. In other words, we didn't spend the 4 days or 5 days needed to shoot out that episode. But for Tim, they allowed it to happen. They actually shot out 1 episode so he could direct it. And I don't know whether it made Fred might have felt a little bit uncomfortable having one of the actors direct him. And then, tag onto that, it's a 21-year-old kid telling some, almost mid-50s, if not late 50s-year-old seasoned pro actor what to do or how to do it. Might have been, a little bit too much. But Fred did it. He was a good sport, and, I'm sure he thought he was helping Tim's career. But what came down was that 5th year, when we knew we were coming back, Tim marched in and said, I want to direct at least 10 episodes or I'm not coming back. And they just said, no way.
Wow. Well, we do like to mention on our show projects that our guests have done that they probably don't get asked about a lot. And we have to ask you about, you were actually in Paul Bartel's first film, Private Parts.
We're a big Paul Bartel fan.
Paul's a great guy. He was, I don't want to say a wannabe Hitchcock, but had he kept going, I think that's where he would have liked to have been. Kind of saw himself that way. He's kind of a mysterious guy and pretty cool. I mean, I hung out with him and knew him a little bit before we did the film that I did. Actually, the original title on it was called what's Private Parts? It was called Vital Parts, which even sounded worse. And I wondered about that. I thought, well, you know what? This almost sounds like a porno movie. How they ever? No, and you're talking about mid-70s or late 70s when this thing came out. And then it finally came out with the title Private Parts. And you know what happened to that film? It was actually, what was her name? There was a huge, can't think of her name anymore, a huge critic in New York, really loved the film, gave it a glowing review. And so we thought, well, I guess people got past the title. But during that period of time, they actually had a lot of porno theaters in the United States. I think every city had one, and L.A. had a plethora of them. And the L.A. Times had taken to distinguish the porno theaters and what they were running from the regular theaters. I mean, this goes back to a newspaper. Who remembers that, right? But anyway, they had the entertainment section where you looked up the movies and you saw the ads and the posters for them and the theaters they were playing in. And the ones that had porno theaters they were grayed out. They didn't have the full black ink, so you knew what they were. And for some reason, because of that title, Private Part, they wouldn't, I don't know what they thought the movie was, but they kept printing it in the gray area. And I think people thought it was a porno film, and then MGM just finally yanked it. I guess the title, Private Parts, just sounded too salacious for the mid-'70s. So it ended up in the MGM vault for all those years. Wow. And it wasn't until Turner got a hold of it. And, they started putting it on cable TV, and it got a following, and it's kind of a cult classic. I mean,
it is.
It's actually a very well done movie. It's kind of more of a murder story, murder mystery, I guess you would call it. You know, and it had its elements. It was a little bit before its time too, in that there was some, I don't want to say excessive gore, but definitely for that time and place. I remember they had a beheading that wasn't even in the script, and I think it was near the beginning of the movie that somebody's sneaking down a hallway looking for something, and somebody steps out, and you kind of see, you never see the blade touch the person, but you see them take a swipe with a pretty long blade, and then you see this head rolling down the hallway. Well, back in the mid-'70s, that would have been pretty startling. They just didn't show stuff like that, and they didn't show blood and gore quite the way they do now. You know, anybody that's seen Saw or Hostel, you know, it's not like they cut away anymore. They just stay there while they're poking somebody's eye out, and you got to watch it.
Or Hostel 3 with your brother.
Yeah. In fact, when Barry brought the scene up, because I edit too, and have a production company, and I edit his reel, and we were like, I said, if you want to put this on your reel, maybe I better just play it on you and cut out the other part of it. So that's what I did. I mean, you see the guy for a flash, and then I had to recut the scene so I could put it on reel. It's just too gory for somebody, and you don't want them to turn your demo reel off.
Right.
And then the other part I had to just completely take the sound out, because all it is this guy screaming his head off.
You know, I think he might be coming back to you and asking to add that back on, because when we had him on the show, I totally convinced him, and he's now cool with the teenagers. So he liked that.
It's a pretty gory scene. I mean, he basically draws a line around this guy's face and his eye holes, and then peels his face off, and you hear all the sinews and muscles snapping and stuff.
Well, when we watched it, Terry was just yelling out, "Ernie, no! No!"
Yeah.
Well,
it's kind of a cool scene. I mean, for Barry, I thought it's kind of good, because he always kind of plays a lawyer, a dentist, or a doctor, a CPA. So
now, you see,
you got to have something fun to do once in a while.
Right.
You got to rip somebody's face off in this industry. So
I know he's your brother, and he's very kind to you. You guys get along. But if he ever wanted to make fun of you, he's got a couple up on you, because you worked a couple of times with somebody that's a really good friend of ours. He's here in the studio all the time. Fred Olin Ray.
Fred's a good friend. I've known Fred forever.
He's a great guy. He did Bikini Drive-In, Attack the 50-foot centerfold, or 60-foot centerfold.
I did the 60-foot centerfold. I wasn't supposed to do it. I mean, I'm kind of more friends of his, I guess, from the production side. Obviously, he knew, I was on My Three Sons all those years. But there was another, I think another actor that was supposed to do that part. I don't know what happened. Something went wrong, and I got a call from Fred, and he said, "Hey, can you do me a favor?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, sure. What is it?" So he said, "I got this role," and I said, "Yeah, I'll do it. Sounds like fun." And I was thinking he was going to tell me it's in a couple of weeks. I go, "When is it?" And he goes, "Tonight." Like midnight. Are you kidding? So yeah, that's the way it went down. Somebody brought the script over. I learned it, and I guess I worked on it. I don't know, it was like two or three nights. They were like all-night shoots. So it was kind of fun,
He's very genuine, and it's a big thrill for him to be able to put people that he loved watching growing up, or people that were his favorites in TV and movies. And if you get put in a role and you're known for doing something, you're somebody. Because it's almost like the Quentin Tarantino touch on a lower scale.
Yeah. I feel bad that actors, I mean, a lot of us who've been on shows obviously have a following, and that the fact that the mainstream industry, just has this MO that you've been used and you're used up, and we don't want anything out of you. Only somebody like a Quentin Tarantino sees some sort of value in some of the actors who had a past or did something a long time ago and want to put them back to work.
Right.
The industry, but I mean, that, I go back to the actor's journey again. That's why we explain why new actors, if you're an aspiring actor, you're in a really golden place, especially at the beginning of your career, which is why it behooves you to have this information at the beginning of your career and not later, because you are only new once. You are a fresh face to the industry, and that's what this industry thrives on. The people that do the best in this industry are the fresh faces and the $20 million actors. What happens is, after you're not a fresh face anymore, and the industry, the people behind the scenes, the casting people, and the agents kind of know you, and you haven't clicked yet, then you end up getting into this kind of region where you're just a rank and file actor, just paying their dues and looking for work. But in the beginning of your career, people will seriously consider you for big roles, all kinds of things that you wouldn't even believe, and that's only because you're good and you're new.
Right. Well, Tiffany
and I try and explain that's the reason you want to optimize. You have a window of opportunity, and this industry thrives on fresh faces. It's like when they found Matthew McConaughey. There's a little bit of BS to it. He did that film with Sandra Bullock called The Time to Kill, and Universal had publicity everywhere that they found this incredible actor and just a new discovery, a new raw talent. It's like, get out of here! I mean, for people in the industry, going, this guy's been around the block, for 8-10 years, doing movies that nobody was going to see, like Texas Chainsaw 3, and films like that. And not to take away, because that's what you got to do, because you end up with stuff on your reel. But it's also stuff that's obscure, and maybe a few people have seen it, but it's not known to people in the industry that you did it.
So once you make
and so all of a sudden they're making a big deal that you're a fresh face when you're not really a fresh face. You've been around, but you have to look at Matthew McConaughey and go, hey, it didn't matter whether he was in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He was amazing.
Yes.
The film can suck, but he's really good.
And of course, once they make it big, those first films are always the ones that come back around. And
everybody's got those, though. It's funny. In fact, it was one of the guys that is part of the actor's journey, too, is a guy named Brett Maddock, who's a writer. He wrote Batteries Not Included and Short Circuit and the last version of Wild Wild West. He's also a director. They did Tremors.
Yes.
But anyway, somebody was doing something on he and his partner, Scott Wilson, and I guess they were trying to find some historical stuff on him, and they had some old footage when they started out. When you're a producer, you're just like an actor. You're not directing big movies. You're directing like industrials and educational. Well, they found some footage that they had shot on a factory floor somewhere, and it was kind of funny because I guess they were both in it, and some guy was on the floor describing how some machine worked. And so, anyway, the editor comes running in the room, and he goes, hey, you guys, you got to come here and look at this. And they're like, what? So he comes running in, he says, watch this footage of this guy that's on the factory floor. You know who it was? Kevin Costner.
Oh, Kevin's done some trauma films, too, so, yeah.
Well, gave him the bug to become an actor that, he was a factory worker, did this little scene and went, hey, that's great. It's like another guy that's in the actor's journey. There's another, because I always hear actors, complain, well, I don't know if I can do that because this happened to me and that, and I don't know if I can do it. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to hear your excuse, because I have a friend, and how he got into show business was directly from jail.
Yeah, Danny
Trejo.
From Vacaville and San Quentin and, you name it.
Yes.
He was in jail, but and then he became a drug counselor, and he had a history of crime, and he decided to turn himself around, became a drug counselor, had a client, and called him up, and the guy says, hey, I need your help. I think I'm going to use drugs. Can you come down here and just hang with me and then talk? And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll be right down. So he went to where the guy was, and he's like, well, what is this? He goes, he says, oh, well, I'm working. He goes, I work as a grip on a movie. He goes, oh, I thought you were like in a factory or something. So he said he hung out on the set with this guy, and anyway, somebody on the set saw this guy and said, hey, look, you look perfect. There's a scene in this movie where this guy's fighting somebody, and I remember you from jail, and you were a fighter in jail in San Quentin. He says, how would you like to do this scene and choreograph it? And this guy said, I didn't even know what the word choreograph meant, but he said, well, does it pay $50? And the guy said, yeah, it pays $300. And, he didn't know any better, so he said, for $300, he goes, how bad do you want this guy beat up? He goes, no, it's the main actor. You can't beat him up.
Wow.
You're just going to be doing a boxing scene with him, and we need you to show him what to do. Anyway, the movie was a film with John Voight and Eric Roberts called Runaway Train, and the actor's Danny Trejo.
Yes. We love, because we had this one actress on, and they did a prison film, and they were on a set, and Danny Trejo seemed to know where he was going. I mean, they didn't need to show him where to go. She's like, how do you know this place? Oh, I was in prison here. So...
Yeah, no, I mean, he had his little moment in the sun doing the other stuff, too. In fact, it was funny when I was getting the people ready to do the actor's journey and calling some different people, see if they were going to be available, I ended up calling him, and I said, hey, Danny, I said, you want to meet so I can tell you what this thing is? He says, yeah. He goes, I said, well, you're going to be down in the Studio City area at all tomorrow? And I'm like, he goes, no, but I'm in Toluca Lake. I go, why don't I meet you there? I said, we could either meet at at the what was there at the time? I guess it was that Marie Callender. I think it's gone now. Either Marie Callender or there's Big Boy Bob's up the street, and he says, "Well, I can meet you at the Big Boy Bob's." I mean, at the Marie Callender, and I said, "Oh, you don't like Big Boy Bob's?" He says, "Well, can't go in there." He goes, "I robbed that place about 30 years ago, armed robbery, so I'm not allowed to ever go back in there again."
Wow. Well, as we wind this up, Tiffany definitely wants to talk about what you're doing now, as well as your whole thing with teaching great actors with First Team Productions. I just got to ask you one more corny question from the past, and I appreciate you so much sticking with us. Did My Three Sons really do a reunion movie with the Partridge Family?
Well, it was hardly a movie. It was an episode. I think it was only about a half hour long. I can't remember it being an hour. Maybe it was. But yeah, how that came about, and we were shocked as everybody else. We were approached by Dick Clark to do a My Three Sons kind of retrospective. And then as it kind of progressed, then we found out we're doing it with the Partridge Family. We're like, all right, well, whatever. I mean, that sounds kind of whatever, show business. I guess somebody threw something to a hopper and it spits out the demographics of what you needed. So, maybe we needed a Shirley Jones or David Cassidy, and that was going to boost the ratings up.
Well, you guys knocked the Brady Bunch out of a job, so usually they put those two together. So
they had knocked them out of a job, but they came back and had staying power, kind of like us. They did all those Brady Bunch reunions and Brady Bunch movies.
Yes.
We never came back. And when we went off the air, and I guess the final episodes probably played in '73, that was it. We never came back for an update or a reunion. The only thing we ever did was this Dick Clark thing where we weren't really in character. We talked about the show, and I think they did one little skit that kind of mocked My Three Sons that Barry did with Fred MacMurray and Beverly Garland or something. It was kind of a cute scene. But outside of that, yeah, My Three Sons was one of the few shows. And I mean, the reason being is Fred MacMurray had it in his contract when he first started My Three Sons. And normally after about the third, fourth year of the show, they start stripping it. They put it on syndicated TV in the daytime and start running it, every single day for a daytime audience. And Fred MacMurray wouldn't allow that to happen. He said, while it's on the air and in prime time, I don't ever want to see it on TV in the daytime. I don't want to compete with myself or dilute the show. So that was probably a good idea. But the bad part about it is by the time the show did go off the air, and then about 6 months later, it was on the air every single day, and they were running it in what they call network syndication. It kind of lost some of its luster. And the other fact was the reason My Three Sons was canceled was not due to poor ratings. Like we were probably, I would say in probably somewhere in the 20s or 30s when it went off the air, which, you got to be down in the 60s before you're getting canceled. And at that time and place, too, there really wasn't cable TV. So when you had a network show on, unlike today, that, if you're on ABC, CBS, NBC, and you're pulling 20 million people, hey, that's a good audience. Back in those days, because it wasn't cable, it was just the three networks. If you had a hit show like My Three Sons, you had 50, 60 million people a week watching the show. So that was huge. So My Three Sons really, it wasn't on. And I think what happened was the FCC came down with a ruling in 1972. We were actually owned by the network at that point. Fred MacMurray and the original producer, Don Pedersen, sold it to the network. And then they made it under a license, and they just produced it at that point for CBS. But CBS actually owned the show. The FCC no longer allowed the networks to own shows and exhibit them. It was under the antitrust stuff, kind of like what happened
that makes sense.
A long time ago in studios. Studios weren't allowed to own movie theaters. It's too self-serving. So basically, they had to pick one show. They allowed them to keep one show under their umbrella, and the rest they had to divest of. And so My Three Sons was quietly euthanized, and William Paley's wife picked out Gunsmoke because that was her favorite show, and that was their flagship show. So they continued to produce that for another couple of years.
That's better than my theory, because I loved it when Beverly Garland, the Dear Beverly Garland, came on. B-movie queen, did all his films with Roger Corman. But along with Beverly Garland had to come Dodie, and I figured like Cousin Oliver in the Brady Bunch that maybe she killed the show. I wasn't sure. What
do they call that, like Jump the Shark or something? I kept hearing that term. I'm like, what is that? Yeah, I guess some people didn't like her. I mean, she was a very precocious little kid, and not that anybody didn't want to work with her, but she didn't when you're that age, you have no perspective of anything. She'd do a scene with Fred MacMurray, and then all of a sudden haul off and like kick him right in the shin, right in the middle of the scene. You got kicking Fred MacMurray. It's like, oh my God. So yeah, she was a bit of a handful, but somehow, yeah, the audience didn't warm up to her, I guess, in the way that they had hoped. I mean, she was really a cute little kid, and yeah, she was precocious and fun to work with. In fact, I don't know whether you know, her brother was Leif Garrett.
Oh, really?
A lot of people didn't know. Yeah,
No.
Leif was always on the set, hoping. In fact, I think he did some episodes of My Three Sons too, as like a friend of Dodie's or whatever.
Wow.
We had a lot of fun. Barry got to work with. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of all the different people that came on the film on the show. But Jodie Foster, was on there. I think 2 or 3 times. It was, like a school friend of his.
So many people.
Alminia. I mean, we had so many people work on that show. Jimmy Stewart, just a lot of old-time movie stars that worked on the show that were, I guess, friends with Fred MacMurray.
Well,
and then the guy that directed our show was one of the classiest guys I've ever worked with. He was kind of my mentor, I guess. Was a guy named Fred DeCordova.
Oh, yeah.
Who left our show and went on to produce Johnny Carson.
Sure
the last
did.
20 years of Johnny Carson, I guess, after My Three Sons went off the air. But he was an amazing force to be reckoned with, and he had directed all the Burns and Allen TV shows and Jack Benny shows, so he really had a pedigree. He was, just one of the coolest guys. I think, when you talk to audiences today, about Fred MacMurray, it doesn't really, resonate the way it did in, say, 1960, and I always have to tell people, well, when Fred MacMurray came to do the show, it was unheard of that a movie star of that caliber was actually going to do the daily grind of a TV series. It was absolutely unheard of. About the most a guy like that would maybe do an episode of an I Love Lucy just because he liked them, or a Bob Hope special, but most of those guys just only did theatrical films. And Fred had just adopted a pair of girls that had twins. And he really didn't want to go on the road anymore and do these movies where you're gone, for extended periods of time. And he was looking around for something he could do in L.A. And somehow the producer, Don Feddersen, got wind of that and created the show. And it allowed him to come in and shoot for 3 months, have the whole summer off to spend with his family, and then come back. And he ended up owning the show. But you're talking about a guy that, the network, when he ended up doing that show, was falling all over themselves. I mean, our show, because of that, was just handled with kit gloves. I mean, anything we needed or wanted, we had, and the CBS brass were always coming down to the set to meet Mr. MacMurray and have lunch with him and all that kind of stuff. But to put it in perspective today, it would be almost like somebody like Brad Pitt saying, "You know what? I got kids. I don't want to go on the road anymore. I'm just going to do a TV series." You'd be like, "What? Brad Pitt's doing a TV series?"
Yeah, now you got actors like we were talking about from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 doing TV commercials.
Yeah.
They didn't do commercials either.
I wanted to talk a little bit, Stanley, about First Team Productions and how you got involved into doing directing and producing and writing and screenwriting, including, I believe, one of the earlier feature films that you were involved with First Team Productions was The Aftermath, which starred a couple of actors that our listeners love, including Sid Haig, Dick Miller, and the late, great Forrest J. Ackerman.
Wow.
Yeah, I've met Forrest Ackerman a couple times while we were doing that. And it was funny, my first time I ever met him, I went up and said, "You owe me $13. What? I go, "You owe me $13. He goes, "Where do I owe you $13 from?" They go, "Remember Famous Monster magazine?" I go, "When I was 8. I didn't have the back issues, and I dumb kid put $13 in cash in an envelope and sent it to Famous Monster magazine to get the back issues, and I never got them. I got my $13, so.
Wow.
But yeah, I actually have had a couple production companies over the years. How this all came about was, as I was getting older as an actor, I guess when I was about 15, 16, I got really interested in the process of how you make this stuff and how it all comes together, and the cameras, the lenses, the editing, the moviola, what is a film stock, what are film stocks, what is the difference between them, and how do you put a show together, how do you break, sequentially the story down so that you can shoot it in bits and pieces, and in our particular case, way out of continuity. So From the time I was 15 to the time I was about 18, I was immersed in all that, and what a great place to be. The cameramen were so nice. They showed me everything about the camera, how to load the film, and we had a Mitchell BNC reflex camera that we used to shoot with, and I learned all about that camera, and I learned all about editing, and I just got the bug. And anyway, when I was about 20, I formed a production company and started doing commercials, and we did some music videos, and we did educational, industrial, whatever we could do, we did. So I kind of cut my teeth on that, and just kept doing that, and probably got more involved in that over the years than the acting. I think I saw the writing on the wall for me. That the period of time I came off of being on a hit show like My Three Sons, it really wasn't a period of time where you could segue very easily from being a TV actor into film. There was almost a demarcation line where there were certain casting people in town that cast features, and then there were other ones who cast TV, and the ones who cast the features, they weren't going to see you. They just thought of you as a TV actor, and, that's where you're going to stay. It was almost like a caste system.
You just
recently, it was rough, so I thought, wow, when this is over, I'm back to square one, and it really was. And I didn't have any pretenses about it. I didn't say, oh, hey, I'm a star, or people should be seeing me, or why am I going on a cattle call, or why am I going in there with 10 other actors? Why am I not being seen alone? Or I just said, I'm back to square one. Got to start doing this for real, and went back to acting school, and took it more seriously, got involved in acting classes to learn the other side of acting that I didn't learn because I was too busy acting. But, you can get by with a lot when you're a kid or a teenager, but at some point as an adult you really have to learn some of that stuff. And I started taking directing classes, and I was just seemed to be gravitating more towards the stuff in back of the camera. So
I'm really interested. You just recently...
I've done a lot of stuff, everything from, commercials and industrials, educational. I produced feature film. A couple of years ago I produced, I guess it was in 2012, actually the first Cinerama film that has been done in 50 years, which was kind of remarkable. I didn't even think of the implication when I got involved. A friend of mine, a guy named Dave Strohmeyer, I met him when they completely redid How the West when they restored it, and he was the guy that does all the Cinerama restorations, and we actually met at the premiere for they re-premiered How the West is one at the Cinerama ArcLight Dome, and anyway, we kind of became friends, and then one day we're talking about doing a project, and he had this thing in mind to kind of do another Cinerama thing, and anyway, I came on board as one of the producers, and then I ended up being in it as well. I'm kind of like I don't know if you've ever seen the old Cinerama films, the first ones.
I'm aware of it. Never had a chance.
Travelogue, so we kind of did a mockumentary. That's what we ended up doing. Because the real Cinerama films went to Egypt and the Alps and all these really cool places. We decided to do ours in L.A. But we found some really cool places to do it, and people were unfamiliar with what Cinerama was, but actually seeing it being done again and being projected in this huge widescreen format. In fact, to do it, we had to restore an old Cinerama camera to actually facilitate the production, and it turned out the camera, I think there's only 3 of them left. One of them has been pretty well cannibalized, but the other 2 were sort of okay, but we had to take parts off of one of them to make the other camera work. And it turned out that was the camera that I worked with on How the West is Won.
Oh, wow.
That was the camera that were shot. How the West is Won, the scenes that I was in. So I was like,
kind of
wow,
went full circle.
Like kind of recursive and trippy that, I'm working with something that I worked with. And then, interesting enough, I'm probably one of the few people who've ever been then in 2 Cinerama films, because the only other person I can think of that's been in 2 besides me is Russ Tamlin.
Right.
He was in How the West Was Won, and he was also in The Wonderful World of Brothers Grimm, which was shot in Cinerama. And Debbie Reynolds, she'd be the only other person. So we're 3 unique people that, there's only 3 people that have been in a Cinerama movie twice. So.
Well, before we let you go, Stanley, there are 3 projects that you have listed on your website for First Team Productions that I wanted to talk about. You have these listed as in progress. The first 2 projects involve somebody that was involved with your Actor's Journey project, as well as somebody we've had on the show, and I think he's a great actor who doesn't get enough credit, and that is Steve Railsback. And you have two projects that you're working on with him. One is called Barstow, and one is called Johnny No Face. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, Johnny No Face is actually I don't want to call it a horror film, but kind of a horror thriller, I guess you would say. And anyway, I asked Steve to be in it, so at this juncture, it helps to kind of package your project with somebody, and Steve certainly has a reputation, at least at this point, of having done a lot of material in that genre, so his name adds a lot of value to it. Barstow is actually Steve's project. I mean, if it goes, I'm the producer on it, and I've been the one who goes out and raises the money. That's, for people that don't know anything about the entertainment industry and they hear the word producer, and that all sounds great, and I'm probably a different kind of producer than most people anyway, but I'm the guy that goes out and tries to raise the money, to do the films with. So that's my day job. So it's almost like the bad part of being an actor. That's the bad part of being a producer. Your meetings and phone calls all day long with potential investors, and that's really what we do. But it's a great film. His brother wrote it. Yeah, Philip Railsback, who subsequently passed away. Passed away actually a couple of years ago, and Steve, I think, has been trying to get the film going even before I came on board with it, with some other people, and it just didn't happen. So I thought I'd give it a shot, see if I can get it funded.
He's so great. If you see his portrayal of Charles Manson.
That's about the time that I met Steve. Actually, how I met Steve, I've known Steve, probably going on almost 40 years. I hate to say it, but Steve came out to California to do the stuntman. I mean, not to do the stuntman, but to do the, Helter Skelter. Mm-hmm. And the connection was my brother at that point in time was, kind of going through a crisis too here in LA. He was getting work, but he decided to go back and see if he could get some stage work and do Broadway or off Broadway. And he lucked out. He got immediately hired, I think about 2 weeks after he was there, in a production by Jose Quintero, great theater director. And they were doing The Skin of Our Teeth. And Steve was one of the actors cast in it, as was Barry, and they ended up opening at the what's the big theater, the Kennedy Center in Washington D.C. And anyway, the goal was to bring it back to Broadway, and it eventually came to Broadway, and they did a run, and they became friends. And right after that, Steve did a film for Elia Kazan called The Visitors, and then because of his participation in that film, Elia Kazan, I think, recommended him to the producer who was looking around for somebody to play Charles Manson, and he got the part, came out to California, and anyway, he was a friend of Barry's, and, I met him, and, we all just have been friends ever since that point in time.
Yes.
Well, hard to believe it.
He's highly underrated.
And, Steve's done some great films. Did The Stuntman, a lot of... it seems more recently more in the horror genre. Yeah. He did Ed Gein, which is actually Psycho. That's who Psycho was actually based on. The Alfred Hitchcock version, they just changed the name and all that, but the real story was the story of Ed Gein. So Steve produced that and starred in it. And he's a great guy.
So where can your fans? I know you have these 3 websites we're going to mention. Is there any place? Because I know you do wonderful art. Okay, I saw your art on KTLA when you were there with your brother and that. And is there a place that we can buy some of your stuff? I mean, do you have shows, exhibitions, or?
I don't really do the stained glass thing, right? That's kind of how I got back into it. People go, well, how did you learn how to do this? And I was like, you try spending 12 years on a soundstage where you can't make any noise. That's how that came about. And when I finally did get an electric guitar, they banished me when I was on the other side. But, I was always interested in art. I've always done sculpture and painting and all that. So photography, I just always kind of absorbed with that. So I guess when I was in my 30s, I thought, I kind of quit doing it for a while, and I got interested in stained glass and doing artwork actually on glass, fusing glass to glass and fusing acrylic to glass, all kinds of different techniques. And I did that for about 10 years, and a lot of people found out about it. In fact, industry people have my work. Somebody, they commissioned me to do something, or somebody sees something, they'd buy it. I kind of had an impromptu gallery at that time. But, I have there's a website. If you go to my fan website, it's just StanleyLivingston.com.
Okay.
And if you want to see my artwork, go to StanleyLivingstonArt.com. And if you go there, you can at least see the stained glass that I used to do. Like I said, I haven't done it in years and years, but it's pretty cool. A lot of people knew about it and wanted to see it, so I put it up. But then I started putting some of my paintings up as well. Like there's some lithographs there that people can buy, and I've done all sorts of subject matter over the years. So it's just sort of another side. I guess if you're creative in one area, it just kind of spills over. I've always been that kind of person that I have projects that I'm working on, and when I'm not trying to do a film project or not editing, then you feel like you have some control over that. It's yours, and there's nobody telling you how to do it, and you don't have to have meetings with anybody.
Right.
You just do what you do, which is fun. But my heart lies in the film. I guess the film that I'm probably most interested in getting off the ground right now is a film about the Beatles.
Yes, that's the other one I was going to ask you about, the Quarrymen.
The Quarrymen, which is actually about the very, very earliest days of the Beatles. And I've never seen anything done on that, and the story kind of fascinated me. I've been working with a writer for about, over 2 years on this screenplay. And I guess in doing all the research for it, we were like, wow, if these guys hadn't been there in the beginning, and if any one of these things hadn't happened, guess what? There would have been no Beatles.
That's right.
Right.
Backstory is really kind of fascinating. It's not what most people think, that, John met Paul, and then George came along, and then Ringo, and then you go on the Ed Sullivan Show, and, you become famous. It's not that at all. It's more like, meet John, and then eventually Paul, and then Ivan, and Len, and Rod, and all these names of guys you don't know, and you're like, well, what is this? But it was those guys, really, that kind of got the ball rolling for them. And you realize how much serendipity was along, because it was one of those guys, a guy named Ivan Vaughn, who introduced Paul to John. And he didn't go to the same school, so there was probably a good chance they would have never met. And, they met and they kind of struck a chord, and, within a very short period of time, they had a very similar experience that I think was kind of cemented their relationship, was the glue. They had both lost their mothers. Paul lost his to cancer a couple years before that. And John's mother, not long after he met Paul, was killed. She was hit by a hit-and-run driver. I don't know if it was hit-and-run, but she was hit and killed by a driver. And then the other thing that, things that was happening at that period of time, it was one of the Quarrymen's mother who went to bat for them to get them their first gig. There was a church there that did a summer festival every year, but rock and roll was just coming into being, along with skiffle in England, which was, kind of fast, almost like folk music here, but a little bit faster beat. Mm-hmm. But she went to bat with the Reverend and said, no way, no way. We traditionally at these things, we have orchestras, and we have, army marching bands. And she's like, well, you can keep doing that, but you see all these teenagers out here? In a couple of years, you're not going to have them. Mm-hmm. You better give them something that they want if you want to keep them around. And she just hammered on this guy till he finally relented, and it just so happened her son was in a skiffle band, which was the band that John Lennon was in. It was called the Quarrymen, and they got that gig. And it was actually at that gig that this friend of theirs dragged Paul McCartney to see his friend John, and he was kind of blown away by what he saw. And Paul brought his guitar and played a couple songs, and that kind of got the wheels turning. And like I said, it's a pretty different backstory than most people know. And it's interesting too, because it's really the Beatles before they were the Beatles. You're talking about 17-year-old kids.
Right.
What do you know?
People just basically know about Pete Best, but they don't know about any of that other beforehand. And
I mean, there's all kinds of takes. Yeah, Pete eventually comes into the band, and he had another person. Well, the story is about all these guys who eventually have to go for the band to succeed, and it's about growing up and coming of age. And a lot of these other guys, their parents say, "Hey, you're not going to be in a rock and roll band. I don't know what you're thinking. We got a job for you in the factory down here." Right. Or you're going to be working in this textile factory down in the mine. You're not going to be in a rock and roll band. And they acquiesce, and did what their parents wanted to do, or some of them wanted to have, go to higher ed, and by that point, John and Paul really had the bug to do it and the drive, and a lot of it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to, become the Beatles. A lot of stuff had to happen, but mostly all these guys had to fall by the wayside and be let go or be fired or just quit or whatever, so that they could go on and do what they finally did, because they became very serious about it. And, we're mentioning Pete Best came in, and he was the drummer they had up until the point they had Ringo, and there's always been a lot of conjecture about his exiting the band as to why he was let go.
And how it had to be him. I mean, he had to feel like crap. I mean, to be Pete Best, that's not a good thing to be.
It's not. I've actually talked to his brother Rogue, which is probably, in my estimation, maybe the reason Pete Best was finally let go. There's kind of another story there. I mean, when I grew up, it's like, wow, who's Pete Best? What happened to him? Why didn't they want him? And he was a good-looking guy, and then you'd hear, oh, well, he was better looking than the other Beatles, so they let him go. Or Pete Best wouldn't comb his hair. He didn't get his hair cut in Hamburg, that Beetle Bowl haircut that was popular in Germany that they brought back to England, and it kind of gave them just that edge to look different. And you're like, wow, what is that? Because everybody else looked like they were a greaser or right out of, Grease or something. And the other, thing that was said about him, he wasn't a very good drummer. Well, if you really listen to Ringo, and he's not that great either in the beginning anyway, so there had to be something else. Anyway, we kind of get into that in this film, because there's some things that happen that people aren't really aware of that could have brought the whole ship down a couple times with the Beatles right as they were going, and that's one of them. But I don't want to divulge that on the
don't
show.
tell it all, because we definitely, and I'm serious about what I say this, we got to have you back on, because you've got so many interesting projects, and if you get it going and any of these come to light, we have got to cover this, because you've got some great...
Oh, absolutely, I appreciate that. Like I said, it's a life's journey, like I said, and you can be working on something like The Quarrymen, and then something will come out of left field that you didn't even know you're going to be working on, and sometimes you have to keep putting stuff on the back burner, and, that's the way it works.
Right.
I'm going, wow, I can't believe I'm still doing this, and it's 60 years later. I don't want people to think I'm like 100 years old. I'm only 64, but, I feel like I'm 50, and hopefully
you were one of the better
than my years, but
you were one of the better looking sons of the show, and you're still in a heterosexual way, I will say, a damn good looking guy. So
yeah, I get that a lot, and it's like they'll see something like very sexy or whatever, and I'm like, God, who is this person? Where were they when I was 15? I always get that from women. They'll come up to you and go, oh, I had such a crush on you. I was in love with you. And I remember when I was like 15 or 16, I couldn't get a date sometimes. So
really?
I'm like, wow. It all sounds like it's should be great, but in that particular area, if you're meeting people, you're probably meeting people or women, for all the wrong reasons anyway. It's just because you had a little bit of celebrity. It had nothing to do with anything, but you eventually get all that stuff into perspective, and, it all works out, I guess.
Well,
I just hope I can keep going for another 10 years, and
we do too, because I tell you, Stanley, we have not had a lot of people on the show that has done as much as you have between the art, the acting, the writing, the producing, the directing, the editing, the helping other young actors. And it's fantastic that you not only continue to do your craft, but you're helping to give back and helping up-and-coming actors.
Yeah, I guess if I get remembered for anything, I'd almost rather be remembered for that actor's journey than even my 3 cents, because, whatever, having fans is great, but actually helping people that are doing what you did and, having the insight and perspective on it that I have now, because, you guys mentioned that before. You can look at a topic that's very common, like just the word casting or your headshot. Mm-hmm. So here's somebody who's been doing it 40 years talk about what a headshot is and why you need it and what it should be. It's completely different than when you hear somebody who's been in the business 6 months or even 6 years. It's a completely different thing. We've taken everything, like I said, that kind of is just banal, and we've heard it before, and you've probably heard people talk about it. But when you hear experts who've been doing this for decades talk about those things, it's really an eye-opener.
And see, you didn't sell out either because you could have cashed in on your My Three's Sons fame and put out your own brand of potato chips. It could be chips, because...
Or, Barry and I, what we get is Bert and Ernie or Chip and Dale.
All right. Well, Stanley, I want to thank you.
Just coming up to you going, I know you. You're Beaver. And I'm like, wrong show. They mean well, but definitely not Jerry Mathers.
Well, Stanley, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. I encourage our listeners to head over to Stanley's website. You can go to StanleyLivingston.com, FirstTeamProductions.com, StanleyLivingstonArt.com, and, of course, TheActorsJourney.com. It has been so much fun chatting with you and talking about all of the facets of your life and your career, and we really want to thank you for spending the time with us.
Oh, listen, I really, really appreciate it. I've had a lot of fun, too. Thank you so much for having me on and giving me a platform and just remembering me, I guess, after 60 years. God. Flattered. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And like we said, keep us in mind, and when some of your upcoming projects get off the ground, we'd love to have you and some of your collaborators come on to promote them.
Absolutely. I'll definitely keep you guys informed of what I'm doing, and we'll go from there.
All right, great. Have a great rest of the weekend.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.